topic at hand is Smart eCat tips and tricks. So I'm going to pick on my friend John Smith in his 2008 Chevy Silverado. We'll just bring that up on the screen. And I'm just going to click on Smart eCat in the upper left-hand corner. Because really what we want to focus on, and it's really moving into this toolbar here across my second line down. And then from there, we'll get into actually doing some parts and labor searches and talk about some of the other features or functionality that are available there. So starting with in the upper left-hand corner, the very first option there is vehicle. If you click on the vehicle, it takes us back to our edit vehicle screen where I can go ahead and I can select a different vehicle. The concept here was I'm in the middle of Smart eCat, I'm doing a search and someone comes up and says, hey, I need a part for this vehicle. Can you just go look it up for me? So I want to go back and I want to change my year, make, model, and engine. As you look at this window, they segregate between cars and trucks. But if you'll notice trucks versus cars, this is the equivalent of if you're looking in the Auto Edit vehicle window and you're seeing Ford versus Ford truck or Chevy versus Chevy truck. So again, whichever I'd like to search for, cars and or trucks, I just need to make sure I start there before I start entering in my information. Now this was a Chevy Silverado with, I don't remember what engine size, we're looking at a 1500 with a 4.3 liter engine. So I'll reselect the same vehicle. But again, if I wanted to change the vehicle, I could do that using my vehicle window. The VIN piece will tell me, well, here's everything that Epicor can tell me about this vehicle based on the VIN. So again, if you click on the VIN, it says, well, if you're trying to interpret the engine size, then here are the engine characters that we're looking at. In this case, we've got an M engine code. So actually tells me that it was a 5.3 liter engine, not a 4.3. So I may have misidentified my vehicle as we came in. One other note or caveat as it relates to VIN information. It has nothing to do with Smart eCat, but at least merits a conversation or a mention. If I come into my edit vehicle window, we've had the integration to CARFAX or VIN information for quite some time, where you could put your license plate in and use the VIN lookup to resolve year, make, model, and engine. We added this little icon here, which doesn't really tell you exactly what it does and or why. So while that icon sits there, I don't know that I've run into many folks that have been looking at it or using it, but this actually uses what we call Quick VIN Plus through CARFAX. So as I go out and I'm clicking on that icon there, what it's going to do is it's going to tell me, well, here is everything that we could possibly know about this vehicle based upon the VIN number that was entered. So again, if I need to know more information about it, and I can switch my submodels if need be. But again, there's that icon there on the right-hand side. When we introduced this button here, we didn't really tell people what and why. It doesn't really have much relevance as far as Smart eCat is concerned. But again, my meaning or reasoning is, well, we've got the VIN icon here in Smart eCat, but we actually can do that just directly inside of our writer with a little bit more extensive information, but that goes through the CARFAX integration, not necessarily through Smart eCat. As we go along, the category icon just simply takes us back to our category search window. So if I ever needed to just get back home and start another search, that category icon kind of brings me back to center. As we move across from there, the next one says interchange. So the concept of the interchange is to say, I know part number A, and I'd like to know from a different vendor what their part number is for that, their equivalent or their replacement for it. So for example, I know that I've got a water pump, the part number is 8901-8123. And right now I've got AutoZone as my selected supplier. If I said, well, tell me what AutoZone's part number is. But so it tells me that their replacements for that would either be the 6494S or the 6494N. What about, I don't know, Advanced Auto Parts? What is their replacement for it? So if I went ahead and I switched from Advanced, it's going to do the query again, and it will tell me if Advanced has a equivalent part number as a replacement for it. So we'll do 8901, 8123, and then now do my lookup, and then now it's going to tell me exactly what Advanced has. If I wanted to add any of these onto a transaction, I could go ahead and I could just check the box and then hit transfer. It'll add it into my posted parts and labor tab. So the purpose here really is going out and trying to find, I've got part number A and I need to know the equivalent from a vendor as to what would be their part number B. So that's what Interchange brings to the table. The next icon over is Buyer's Assist. Now you'll notice that Buyer's Assist on my screen is grayed out. Buyer's Assist is a licensed feature, but the concept of Buyer's Assist is it is a reverse parts lookup. What I mean by that is whenever we're searching for parts in the catalog, we put in year, make, model, engine, and it tells us, here's the water pump, here's the air filter, here's the starter for that vehicle. This does a reverse parts lookup. I know the part number, I just need to know what vehicles it fits. So I'm going to go out to the NAPA catalog just for a second to hopefully give us a little bit more of an illustration of what I'm referring to. Because NAPA has this out on their NAPA ProLink site, what they call their buyer's guide. It's Buyer's Assist in our world. But just as an example to try to better explain what I'm referring to, I came out here and I put in line code SFI part number 21334 and hit submit. It tells me that that's an oil filter that fits all of these different, I pause it. It doesn't tell me it's an oil filter. I already know it's an oil filter. But it fits all of these different vehicles, and again, make, model, and then the range of year that that part number would fit. That's the same concept as Buyer's Assist here, is you put it in, except it won't just look at NAPA, which is what ProLink will do. It will look at any of the vendors that are inside of or available, any of the manufacturers inside of Smart eCat. So my apologies for not being able to show that to you. But again, that's your concept. And again, it works best for if you stock a high volume of inventory. Maybe you've got someone managing or handling your inventory control, and I'd like to try to keep track of, well, I've seen some movement on this part number. Let me take a look and see. Does it fit 2017, 2018, 2019 vehicles? So it's a more relevant number that maybe I haven't been stocking but should. Or does it fit an 83 Ford Tempo that I just happen to see one of those come rolling through my shop? And so I've got a part, I've got a part that I used one time but wouldn't want as my assortment. So really Buyer's Assist most relevant to those that are still stocking a high volume of inventory, trying to make sure that the inventory they've got on their shelf is relevant based upon the vehicle types that they're going to see. Last one over there says update coverages. So I'm going to click on the update coverages, and you'll notice I've got a fairly extensive list of suppliers that I'm connected to. Updating coverages and or keeping manufacturers' coverages updated is important to make sure that we're looking for their current product assortment. Let me see if I can explain that statement a little bit better. I'm just going to go look for an air filter, and I'm going to look for that air filter for that 2008 Chevy Silverado. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let my vendors tell me what they've got pricing and availability wise. So anytime we do a search in the Smart eCat functionality through the Epicor catalog, it actually does two separate queries. And what I mean by that is the first thing the catalog does is it says, okay, go to the Epicor catalog and tell me which air filters fit this 2008 Chevy Silverado. After it gets that list, it then says, okay, now let me ask Advanced, CarQuest, NAPA, O'Reilly, AutoZone, Pep Boys, whoever it is that we're connected to for pricing and availability. Now, if you went out to the Epicor catalog and you said, hey, I'm looking for an air filter for a 2008 Chevy Silverado, notice there's this button here that says all lines. If I click on that, it tells me that it has information or part numbers potentially available from all of these different vendors and manufacturers, because you'll notice you've got things like Firestone, Champ, but then you'll also have just Champ as its own from Champion Labs. So again, all of these different manufacturers and or vendors could give me information about an oil filter. So if you counted through my list, I've got maybe 100 different vendors that have an air filter available for a 2008 Chevy Silverado. My local NAPA doesn't carry all 100 of those. My local CarQuest does not carry all 100 of those. And certainly in my local inventory, I'm not carrying that many different lines of air filters. I've got the Gold line and the Pro Select line from NAPA. Advanced carries the CarQuest Premium filters, the Standard filters, the Purolator filters, and if I continue down a little further, it looks like they've got the Purolator ones, K&N Engineering, DriveWorks, and so on and so forth. So they've got a handful of different air filters that they may have available, but probably not more than maybe 6, 8, 10 different lines. What allows us to do that search where we say, hey, tell me from the Epicor catalog what air filter fits this vehicle, is what's called a manufacturer's coverage list, or an MCL file for short. What a manufacturer's coverage list does is it says, all right, Epicor, you have 100 different vendors that are giving you filter information. When I go to ask the question from NAPA, I want to ask for these 3 lines, these 6 lines for advanced, these 5 lines from AutoZone, wherever the numbers are. So again, the manufacturer's coverage list filters down from the full list of parts that are in the Epicor catalog to just the parts that should be available from that vendor. Now, vendors change lines all the time. They added a new line of shocks and struts, they discontinued another one. So stop asking me for the KYB and start asking me for the Moog as we go through. What keeps that list updated is this Update Coverages tab. So if you came in here and you said, well, I want to make sure I've got the most recent list for advanced auto parts, you can go ahead and you can highlight it and click on Download and or Update. It says I've reached out to Advanced to say, make sure that my coverage list matches your current assortment, meaning what you have posted out on the web is what I can buy from my local Advance. And now it has updated that coverage. Now, the concept of updating the coverages has some other configurable elements behind it. Meaning I went through and I did what we just call a manual update. I told it to go ask Advance for their current coverage list. As opposed to having to do that on any given or regular basis, there is a configurable setting. I'm going to jump out of Smart eCat for a minute. I'm going to get over to the configuration side of life. So in configuration, underneath the configuration header, I'm going to go down to repair order and then catalog options. Down at the very bottom, you'll notice download new Smart eCat supplier coverage files after a catalog update when our writer starts, and your options are automatically prompt or never. You've probably seen this window pop up. You've either loaded your Epicor catalog DVDs, or now for shops that are using what we call dynamic updates, meaning pulling those DVDs essentially down from the web, you launch our writer and a gray window pops up and it's got all of your vendors listed there. And depending on whether it's set to prompt or it's set to automatically, it will either just go through and do those coverage list updates for you. So my recommendation would be that we set that to automatically as opposed to prompt. If you give someone the option to say no, well, they might say no, and then therefore it won't get updated. But so we're going to have the system automatically update those after we've downloaded a new DVD. Now there is a companion setting to that, still in the configuration module, and it's on each of the individual suppliers. So I came into a supplier, and we'll just pick on Advanced just because they're going to be the closest to the top of my list. And then over here on the right-hand side, we're using an IAP connection to connect to Advanced. Not so worried about what type of connection, just the fact that we are connecting to Advanced. If you notice, set coverage file download options. If I click on that, it says, well, this coverage file can be manually downloaded and automatically downloaded. So what that means is that once a month, the one that we just talked about in catalog options, that's an automatic download. So that can go ahead and update my Advanced coverage list. I can also click on the update button in Smart eCat to have it update my coverage list. So that's manually and automatically downloaded. If I said I'd like it to be manually but not automatically, then I could say, well, now I can go into Smart eCat, I can click on the update button, but that automatic one that runs based on the catalog options setting will not touch this supplier. If I say it's manually created and manually imported, then it basically says I can't update it unless I actually go through and manually modify my coverage list. The most common scenario I might see there would be, well, I've got a vendor that carries, let's just say I've got a franchise CarQuest, and they carry 60, 70, 80% of the standard CarQuest lines on their shelf, but then they also carry their own independent lines that they have decided they want to stock. So I've made a coverage list. I've added lines into that coverage list, and I don't want it to get changed by this automatic download. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to exclude it from that list. So again, the coverage list or the update coverages, it's not something that you have to remember to do on any given basis if it's being done automatically. If it's not being done automatically and we're not doing it manually, again, what you'll likely find is that a vendor introduces a new product line. and we don't see it in Smart eCat because Smart eCat doesn't know to ask that vendor for those new shocks or struts, that new line of filtration that they're carrying. So set it to automatically, let it go through its purposes. If you have a specific vendor you don't want it to modify, go to the supplier configuration and change the download option so it leaves that one alone. And then now it just happens on a rotating basis. New Epicor information gets injected, let's update the coverages. And I don't have to worry about doing that over and over again. One last note or caveat as far as that's concerned. In the Epicor catalog world, our preferred method of installing Epicor is in a server client scenario. And what I mean by that is I have an Epicor server where the data lives, and all of the other workstations look back to that server for their information. In the case where you've got just one Epicor server, then all we have to do is set this up and do this on one box. If you have more than one Epicor server, and the old way to know or tell was, well, how many boxes did you have to load the DVDs on? We would do this on each box where you would load those DVDs. Anywhere where you install the Epicor DVDs, we can go ahead and we can make sure that we're doing those coverage updates. A couple last pieces before we leave this topic, and I'm going to again get out of Smart eCat, and I'm going to go back over into just my desktop. But so there is an animal called the Part Expert Data Utility. In my spiel there talking about coverage lists, I made a mention to the fact that the DVDs was how we used to load this information. However, Epicor has introduced a concept called dynamic updates or dynamic downloads. And what that'll do is that allows us to bring the information down from the web. It makes the DVDs irrelevant. So if you looked at my list here, you'll notice I've got web update or local update. A local update is how I would do the DVD updates. But if I wanted to set up what we call dynamic downloads, then all I have to do is get my credentials, put those credentials in, and then set up a schedule so that it will download automatically. And again, typically when we set this up, we have it do it in the middle of the night, and we have it check every day. They only release an update to the web once a week. But if we have it check every day, no harm, no foul if it doesn't find anything new. It just woke up, took a look, didn't find anything, or if it woke up, found something new, they'll download it right to you. If you're still loading the DVDs and you would like to get shifted to dynamic updates, then just call into our support team. One last caveat or note before I leave the coverage list topic alone, and that is, you notice there's a button down here in the lower left-hand corner that says Set Up NAPA Supplier. The NAPA coverage list cannot be downloaded through that automatic downloads. It is not out on the web anywhere. It actually gets distributed by Epicor in their media, whether it's on the DVDs or it's in the downloads that are coming from the web. In order to get that NAPA coverage list to update, we just need to tell it, well, here is the NAPA supplier that I'm working from. Now, in my case, I don't have any updates scheduled, but in order to kind of fool it, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tell it that here's where we're going to find the DVDs. And then now I can come in and say, here is the servicing NAPA distribution center for my NAPA facility. Meaning it's not every NAPA store in the country. It is, here is the servicing DC. So when my NAPA store gets a shipment, here's where it comes from. And again, we select that NAPA supplier. And if you'll notice, I'm going to jump back into Smart eCat. What it does is it creates a coverage list in Smart eCat that matches the naming convention in that window we just saw. So let me come back out here. Let me find myself a part number again. So, and it would help if I could type. That's going to not return me too many results. But so we came back up here and we did our search. What you'll notice is my coverage list for NAPA is called NAPA-Atlanta_GA. And that's the same exact syntax that was in that window there. So the first time that it loads after we've selected the NAPA supplier, that coverage list gets created in the system. And that's the one we want to use for NAPA to make sure that as NAPA adds new lines or changes their assortment, we continue to have the most updated coverage list to pull from. Well, as long as we're here looking at some parts, anytime that we're in this window here, you'll notice the part is the water pump. The hide unavailable or show unavailable will toggle off. Now, NAPA doesn't have any that are unavailable, but you'll notice that if I've got this turned off, I can see every part that we asked Advance for. If I have it turned on, then I can only see the parts that Advance said they had available. So that's your show versus hide, unavailable. The check versus the X, what these do, if I hit the check mark, it checks every box. Now it checks every box from every vendor. So if I really wanted to add every one of these water pumps onto a ticket, I could use that check mark. The only place that the check mark really has merit is when we look at specifications. The check versus the X just says either check everything or uncheck everything. Our coverage I've got set to Smart Buy, but I have a whole bunch of suppliers that I'm connected to that I don't want to see on my main page. You know, I use AutoZone sparingly, so they're not going to be on my Smart Buy tab, but occasionally I may want to go see if they have a part available, so I can then switch to AutoZone in my list as we go along. The All Lines button I used in my air filter example, this tells me every vendor that Epicor has information about a water pump in regards. Don't know that it's going to be a part in every case. In some cases, maybe a spec like a coolant type. But again, that's what All Lines does. And then primary, secondary, well, I really can't give you a great use for this in today's world. But the concept of primary, secondary would be when I go to query, let's just say I've got a good, better, best for a wiper blade or for a muffler. And so when I go to look in, whether it's my local inventory or from a vendor, I want to go ahead and I want to find the primary one first. If they don't have that one, I can go search the secondary. So let's just pick on NAPA as an example. In NAPA, they've got their safety stop brake pads, their adaptive one brake pads, and their ultra premium brake pads. They also have their TS or their True Stop brake pads. You know, and I want to look for the first three, the SS, the ADOs, or the UPs. If I can't find those on my secondary line, I'll put the TS. None of the vendors will configure anything on a secondary line. You would have to physically go in and do it, and I really can't give you a great business purpose why you'd want to go through the exercise. If I've got a part on my shelf in my local inventory, I want to just see it without knowing that I have to switch to my secondary line to see it. But that's the concept, primary versus secondary. Looking at our parts here, you notice I've got my water pumps coming from CarQuest, and just to the right of my little gray box, there's an icon there that has a C inside of it. This is a link to the CarQuest web link site. So if I was looking at that part, well, here is some more information about that part. So this is what CarQuest web link can tell me about that new water pump that we might be buying from our friends at CarQuest. With NAPA, you'll see an N. So again, this reaches out to NAPA's ProLink site, where it won't show me the spin 360 view, but I can see the bottom or the side or the top on that water pump as we go through. So again, images, definitely, other information, potentially, depending on the part. Anybody else, it'll show us an I. The I actually stands for information, and that's because we're reaching out to Epicor's cover to cover for additional information about that part. Now, it all depends on what Advance, in this case, has given Epicor as far as additional information is concerned, but you can see I can see pictures, product specs, links to TSBs or installation instructions. So again, anytime you see that C, that N, or that I, it's reaching out to a website to try to get us additional information about that part as we go along. So I'll close back out of there. I skipped over one icon up here at the top, that little dollar sign that's up there. And what the dollar sign does is when I'm looking at parts, I've got a column here for my cost, a column for my vendor suggested list, and a column for the selling price to the consumer. If I had a customer that was looking over my shoulder, well, they don't need to know the cost and they don't need to know the suggested list. They just need to know the price. So if I click on that button, then it hides those two columns for cost and then list. Price on that's $322.99. I can assume that it's being marked up based upon my pricing rules. So if I can't expose the cost, well, that's how I hide it. And this stays turned on, meaning if I did more searches, I closed the catalog and I came back in, it'll remember that that was either toggled on or off, and it will, again, expose or hide those columns accordingly as we go through. One last piece before we finish up with our conversation, and I'm going to find some labor. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the water pump labor, and I'm going to dump that on 1.9 hours. And then when I get to my posted parts and labor tab, now we were jumping through some hoops with smart jobs and the rest, so it wants to find me a water pump as well. I'll let it grab one. So we get back in here, Just notice with the labor is across the top, the labor guide, the total time was 1.9. My base labor charge was 161.50. So base labor charges, if I was just charging skill level A versus one of my alternate labor rates, I could adjust or change it, and you'll notice my pricing changing based upon the variable labor rates I've got in the system. As well as the adjusted charge is using smart labor pricing. So if you've got smart labor pricing turned on and configured, it's doing that calculation here, and you can go ahead and you can have it modify the calculation based upon my labor rate here. So if you had more than one applicable labor rate, it would allow you to change that before we post that back over to our transaction. So that brings me to the end of my conversation. Some of the smart eCat tips and tricks, really kind of a catch-all of some of the other facets and functionality in smart eCat.